My own son tried to bury me. Not with grief, not with neglect, but with a shovel made of paperwork and a plot he'd purchased with my own money. I found the deed, crisp and finalized, tucked inside a folder labeled Long-Term Care Facility Options. It was for a plot in the Sunny Meadows Memorial Gardens, plot number 147B, purchased on February 14th, a Valentine's Day gift to himself, securing his future by planning for the end of mine. I'm 72. I still run my bakery 6 days a week. I can lift a 50-pound bag of flour, and I remember every recipe I've ever created by heart. But according to the paperwork my son David had been quietly compiling, I was a fragile, forgetful burden, one step away from needing a permanent bed at Willow Grove Assisted Living. The notary public's office was cold, the air conditioner buzzing too loudly for early spring. The woman across from me, Linda, had kind eyes that couldn't hide her discomfort. "Mrs. Delaney," she said, pushing the document toward me with a fingertip, "before you sign this durable power of attorney, I am required to ask, do you understand you are granting your son, David Delaney, complete authority over your financial and medical decisions? It's very broad." She paused, tapping a line. "This includes the authority to sell assets, like property, without your further consent." I hadn't asked for this document. David had brought me here, saying it was a simple formality, a just-in-case thing all families do. He'd said it would make things easier. But Linda's hesitant tone was a klaxon. I looked down at the form. My signature line was blank. His was already signed, a confident, sprawling slash of ink, and in the field listing the reason for the power of attorney, typed neatly were the words, "Progressive cognitive decline. Client requires protection from poor financial judgment." The world didn't tilt, it crystallized. Every kindness from the last year, the help with my books, the gentle reminders about appointments, the insistence on driving me to the bank, snapped into a different, horrifying focus. They weren't acts of love, they were brushstrokes in a portrait he was painting for everyone else to see, the failing mother. I looked at Linda. "May I have a copy of this before I sign?" My voice was steadier than my hands. She blinked, relieved. "Of course, absolutely." David, waiting in the lobby chair, looked up and smiled. It was the same smile he'd given me at 8 years old, covered in mud and holding a broken vase. Charming, disarming, designed to melt resistance. It didn't work this time. I felt the cold weight of the folder in my bag, the one with the cemetery deed I'd found 3 days prior while looking for my old pastry icing recipes. I'd thought it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. Now I knew it was a blueprint. If you're listening to this and your stomach just dropped because you know that feeling, that icy, heart-stopping moment when someone you love reveals they've been keeping a different kind of ledger, then stay with me. Subscribe to this channel. There are more stories here like mine, and sometimes hearing another woman find her voice is the first step to finding your own. I walked out of that notary office with the unsigned form copied and tucked into my purse, right next to the deed for my own grave plot. David's smile tightened at the edges. "Everything okay, Mom? Get cold feet?" He chuckled, putting an arm around my shoulders. I leaned into the gesture, feeling the performative warmth of it. "Just being thorough, honey, you know me." "That's my girl," but his fingers pressed a little too hard into my arm. In the car, he chatted about his daughter's soccer game, about the new car he was looking at, about the rising property values in my neighborhood. Every topic was a velvet glove hiding a fist of implication. "Your neighborhood is changing. A big house is a lot for you. I could help you leverage the equity." I stared out the window, watching my town, the town I'd built a life in for 50 years, pass by in a blur of familiar storefronts that suddenly felt like a stage set. That night, in the silent, flower-dusted sanctuary of my bakery kitchen after closing, I spread the evidence on the stainless steel work table. The cemetery deed, plot number 147B, Sunny Meadows, $12,500, paid in full, from an account I didn't recognize. A series of printed emails between David and a real estate agent named Brenda discussing the potential listing of my property, the 3-bedroom, 2-bath Craftsman I'd bought with my husband 30 years ago. The owner is elderly and may need to be transitioned to assisted living, so we should price for a quick sale, Brenda had written. David's reply, she's attached to it, but she's becoming less lucid. We'll need to handle it carefully. The most recent one was dated just a week ago. Have you secured the POA yet? That's key. Then there were the bank statements, my statements, which he'd been helping me organize. I'd given him online access for convenience. Now I saw the pattern: small, regular transfers to an account in his name labeled home maintenance or medical support. $200 here, $500 there. Over the last 18 months, they totaled $18,740. Not enough to drain me, but enough to establish a narrative of dependency, of him subsidizing my life. The final piece was a brochure for Willow Grove, slipped inside a magazine he'd brought over. It was circled in red pen on the monthly cost, starting at $6,800 per month. My entire Social Security check, plus half of my bakery's modest profit. I didn't cry, I got angry. Then the anger cooled into a solid, glacial resolve. I turned on the commercial mixer, not to bake, but for the noise. The roaring whir filled the empty bakery, a sound that had always been my therapy. I opened my own laptop, the one he didn't know about, and I started digging. I pulled my credit report. I called my bank directly from the bakery phone and spoke to a fraud specialist named Carlos. I explained, my voice not trembling, that I believed my financial information was being compromised by a family member, and I needed to revoke all third-party access and set up new passwords and security questions. "Are you safe, Mrs. Delaney?" he asked, his voice gentle. "I am now," I said. I wasn't, not yet, but saying it made it feel possible. The first move, the small turn, came at 17% into this nightmare. David came for his usual Saturday visit, expecting lunch, expecting to go over a few things. I had the bakery's account ledger open on the table. "David," I said, stirring my tea, "I was looking at the books. These transfers to you for home maintenance. I can't seem to recall what work was done. Can you remind me? The plumber in January, the roof inspection in March?" I looked at him, my face a mask of confused curiosity. He froze, a piece of cornbread halfway to his mouth. "Oh, you know, Mom, it's all in the invoices. I filed them for you. Don't worry about it." "I'd like to see them," I said, sweetness coating my words like royal icing. "For my own records. Tax season, you know." His smile was strained. "I'll dig them up. They're probably in my messy office. You know how it is." He leaned forward, patting my hand. "You shouldn't stress about this stuff. That's why I'm here." "Of course," I said, withdrawing my hand to pick up my cup. "It's just the plumber. Was it Joe from Pipemaster? He's done work for me for 20 years. I could just call him and get a duplicate invoice." The silence that followed was profound. The clock on my wall ticked 3 times, loud as hammers. I saw a flicker in his eyes, not of guilt, but of recalculations. He'd underestimated me. He'd mistaken my kindness for credulity, my love for laziness. "I don't remember the company offhand," he finally said, his voice a degree cooler. "I'll find it." It was a tiny victory, a hairline crack in his facade, but it was mine. I had seen the flinch. He knew I was looking. "You're getting suspicious in your old age," he said later, trying to make it a joke as he left. His cone was light, but his eyes weren't. They were the flat, assessing eyes of a strategist whose pawn had just moved off its designated square. "No," I said, holding the door open for him. "Just careful. A woman has to be." After he left, the hollow echo of the door closing felt like a starting pistol. I wasn't just defending anymore, I was preparing. I called my lawyer, Eleanor Vance. We hadn't spoken since we updated my will after my husband, Frank, died 5 years ago. "Eleanor," I said when she answered, "it's Margaret Delaney. I need to make some changes, and I need to know how to stop a financial predator who happens to share my DNA." She was at my kitchen table 2 hours later. I showed her the dossier. She didn't gasp, didn't offer pity. She nodded, her sharp eyes scanning each page. "This is premeditated," she said finally. The plot, the emails, the steady withdrawals. He's building a case for incapacity to gain control, liquidate your assets, and likely place you. The POA was the last piece. She looked at me. Do you want to press charges for the theft? We have a clear paper trail for the $18,740. I stared at the deed for the grave plot. Plot 147B. Not yet, I said. I want to dismantle his plan first, piece by piece. Then we move fast, Eleanor said. We revoke any existing POA, draft a new will and a living will explicitly excluding him and naming an alternative agent, a professional fiduciary perhaps. We lock down your assets with notifications to all institutions, and we document everything, every interaction. I signed the documents she brought with her. With each signature, I felt a piece of the weight lift. I wasn't just Margaret the mother. I was Margaret the client, Margaret the principal. It was a suit of armor made of legal parchment. The next confrontation was at my home. He'd let a week go by, a week of unusual silence. He arrived on a Tuesday evening, unannounced. I was in the garden, planting tomatoes. He stood on the edge of the lawn, hands in his pockets. We need to talk, Mom, seriously. By all means, I said, not getting up from my knees. The dirt was cool and real under my fingers. I got a call from First Federal. They said you revoked my access to your accounts. What's that about? It's about my accounts being my accounts, David. This is ridiculous. I'm trying to help you. You're making mistakes. You're forgetting things. Just last week you left the oven on at the bakery. Marcy from the flower shop saw it and called me. A cold shot went through me. I had left the convection oven on once for 10 minutes after closing, when I ran to the dumpster. Marcy had been walking her dog. I'd thanked her for texting me. She'd never called David. He'd called her, digging for ammunition. Marcy told you that? I asked, my voice quiet.
She's concerned, Mom. We all are. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over my tomato plants. This stubbornness, it's not you, it's the confusion. I think we need to have you see Dr. Evans, get a proper assessment. There it was, the first official move to label me incompetent. A doctor's diagnosis would be the master key to everything he wanted. I wiped my hands on my apron and stood, meeting his gaze. I saw Eleanor Vance last week. His face went blank for a second, then darkened. Your lawyer? Why? What did you do? I ensured my wishes are legally protected, I said. David, I found the deed for the cemetery plot. I read the emails with Brenda, the realtor. I know about Willow Grove. The mask shattered. The charming, concerned son vanished, replaced by a man whose plan was unraveling. His expression shifted from fake worry to raw frustration, then to a chilling, dismissive scorn. You went through my things? That's a violation of privacy. Your things? I actually laughed, a short, dry sound. The deed is in a file in my house. The emails are about my home. You purchased a grave for me with what I assume was my money. Don't talk to me about violations. He stared at me, his jaw working. The silence stretched, filled with the chirping of evening birds. When he spoke again, his voice was low, venomous. You're being paranoid, senile. You can't manage this place anymore. You're going to fall or burn the house down or get scammed out of every penny you have. I'm trying to save you from yourself, and you're too damn proud and crazy to see it. Each word was a needle, designed to deflate, to intimidate, to make me doubt my own sanity. They were the kind of lines that leave bruises on the soul, the kind viewers would quote in comments because they've heard them too. You're crazy, you're paranoid, you're too emotional to think straight. I didn't flinch. I held on to the image of the legal documents in my safe, the call with Carlos at the bank, the steady weight of the truth. Get off my property, David. You'll regret this, he spat. When you're alone and confused with no one to turn to, you'll remember this moment. You're choosing to be alone. I'm choosing to be free, I said. There's a difference. He left, his car peeling away from the curb. I stood in my garden until the sound of the engine faded, until the birdsong returned. My hands were shaking. I buried them in the soil, grounding myself in the earth he couldn't sell, in the home he couldn't take. The battle lines were now drawn in the open. The war, however, went underground. He shifted tactics. The direct assaults stopped. Instead, the whispers began. My granddaughter, Chloe, came by the bakery after school, her usual bright face clouded. At 15, she was all long limbs and sharp intelligence, her father's eyes but her mother's gentle heart. Her mother, Lisa, had divorced David 3 years prior, citing irreconcilable differences I was only now beginning to fully understand. "Grandma," Chloe said, picking out a chocolate croissant, "Dad says you're not doing well. He says you fired him from helping you and that you're being influenced by bad people." She couldn't meet my eyes. "He said you might even have to sell the bakery. Is that true?" My heart cracked. He was using my relationship with Chloe as a battlefield. I reached across the table, covering her hand with my flour-dusted one. "Chloe, look at me. Do I seem not well?" She finally looked up, her eyes searching mine. "No, you seem the same. Maybe stronger?" I smiled. "I am stronger. Your father and I disagree about some things about my money, my house. That's all. The bakery is not for sale. It's my home, just like this building is." I chose my next words carefully. "Has he said anything else?" She bit her lip. "He told Aunt Beth you were diagnosed with early dementia and refusing treatment. He said it's a matter of time before you have a crisis." A tear escaped down her cheek. I got scared. I didn't want to believe him, but he sounded so sure. The poison was spreading through the family channels. I had to contain it. "Chloe, I have not seen a doctor for anything like that. He has no diagnosis to share because it doesn't exist. He is mistaken." I couldn't call her father a liar to her face yet. The word mistaken felt thin and inadequate. "Can I tell Mom what you said?" she asked, a sliver of hope in her voice. "You can tell anyone you want the truth," I said, "and you can always come to me. Always." After she left, the victory of standing up to David evaporated, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. This was the cost, the collateral damage. My relationship with my son was ash. Now I had to fight to protect my relationship with my granddaughter from the fallout. The following week, the formal letter arrived from a law firm, Parker and Klein. It was addressed to me, CC'd to Eleanor Vance. It stated that David Delaney, as a concerned son, was petitioning the court for a temporary guardianship and conservatorship to evaluate my apparent declining capacity and vulnerable financial situation. It cited the revocation of agreed-upon assistance, erratic financial decisions, and concerns from community members as evidence. Enclosed were 3 affidavits, one from Marcy at the flower shop, stating she'd witnessed me appearing confused and leaving appliances on, one from a neighbor, old Mr. Peters, saying I'd forgotten to collect my mail for several days last month. I'd been visiting a friend out of town. The third was from David himself, a masterpiece of twisted narrative, painting himself as a devoted son at his wits' end with a stubborn, deteriorating parent. This was the escalation. He was taking me to court to have me declared incompetent, to make the state give him what I had refused. Eleanor was grim when I brought her the letter. It's a common tactic. They bully, then they lawyer up when the bullying fails. The burden of proof is on him, but these hearings, they're invasive, stressful, and the mere petition can do damage. Judges often err on the side of caution, granting temporary orders. I am not losing my home to a temporary order, I said, my voice iron. Then we fight, Eleanor said. We get our own evidence. We get affidavits from people who see you every day, competent and capable. Your doctor, your accountant, your employees, your longtime customers. We get an independent geriatric assessment to prove your cognitive health. We turn his narrative to dust. She leaned forward. "Margaret, this will be expensive and personal. Everything will be aired in court documents." I thought of the $18,740 he'd taken, the $12,500 grave plot. "Use his stolen money to pay for it," I said. "I'm filing that police report now." Walking into the police station was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. I carried a file with the bank statements, the transfers, my own sworn statement. The officer at the desk, a woman with a calm demeanor named Ruiz, listened without interruption. When I finished, she let out a slow breath. "Financial exploitation of the elderly," she said. "It's sadly common. The hardest part is usually getting the victim to report it." She looked at me with respect. "You've done the hard part." Filing the report was a seismic shift. It was no longer a private family dispute. It was a criminal matter. Eleanor used it immediately, sending a copy of the report to Parker and Klein with a terse cover letter stating their client's petition for guardianship was not only without merit, but was being pursued by someone under investigation for financially exploiting the very person he claimed to protect. The backlash was immediate and ugly. David didn't call, his new lawyer did, threatening defamation, demanding I drop the false police report. Eleanor handled it, her voice cool and unyielding over the speakerphone. "The report stands. We welcome a full financial audit. In fact, we insist on one as part of the discovery process for the guardianship petition." The next skirmish was at the bakery. David came in during the Saturday morning rush. He didn't approach the counter. He stood near the door, watching me, a living, breathing cloud of intimidation. My regulars, the morning coffee crowd, sensed the tension. The cheerful din faded. I was handing Mrs. Henderson her usual bran muffin when I saw him. Our eyes locked. I finished the transaction, my smile not slipping, then I walked around the counter toward him. "You are not welcome here, David," I said, my voice low but clear in the sudden quiet. "It's a public place," David said, louder for the audience. "I'm just a customer, Mom. Can't a son buy a coffee from his mother's bakery?" The performance was back, the wounded son. "You are not a customer," I stated. "You are creating a disturbance. Leave or I will call the police." I pulled my phone from my apron pocket. His face flushed with anger. He took a step closer, hissing so only I could hear. "You're destroying this family. For what? A house? A pile of money? You're a selfish old woman." "Officer," I said into my phone, my eyes never leaving his, "this is Margaret Delaney at the Rising Roll Bakery. I have a trespasser who is refusing to leave and causing a disturbance." I gave the address.
The theater of it, the public nature of his humiliation, was what finally broke him. The customers were staring, some with pity, most with disapproval directed at him. He was the villain in this scene, and he knew it. "You'll pay for this," he whispered, a final, impotent threat before he turned and stalked out. The bakery exhaled. Conversations resumed, hushed and curious. Mrs. Henderson gave my arm a pat as she left. "You okay, honey?" she murmured. I nodded, but inside I was trembling. The small, satisfying turn of calling the police, of publicly reclaiming my space was real, but it was also a Rubicon. There was no going back. The weeks that followed were a grueling marathon of preparation. I underwent a 4-hour neuropsychological evaluation. I met with my doctor, my accountant, and gathered letters from people like Old Joe the plumber. Margaret still gives me better business advice than my own broker. From my head baker, Sophia. She runs this place with a precision I can't match, and I'm half her age. And from a dozen loyal customers. I compiled a portfolio of my own. Bakery profit and loss statements showing steady growth, my meticulously organized personal budget, certificates from small business courses I'd taken just last year. Meanwhile, the police investigation moved forward. Detective Ruiz subpoenaed David's bank records, tracing the $12,500 for the cemetery plot directly from one of the accounts he'd siphoned my money into. Confronted with this, his story changed. It became a misunderstanding, a plan for the future we'd discussed. But the date of the purchase, after I'd explicitly told him I wanted to be cremated and my ashes scattered in my garden, told the real story. The guardianship hearing was set. The night before, Chloe came over. She brought no baked goods this time, just herself. We sat on the porch swing. "Mom showed me the court papers," she said quietly. "The ones Dad filed." She explained what guardianship means. She swallowed hard. "He wants a judge to say you can't make decisions? That's monstrous." Hearing the word from her lips was both a relief and a tragedy. "He wants control, Chloe. He's convinced himself it's for my own good, or maybe he's just convinced himself he deserves what I have. I don't know anymore." "I have to testify," she said suddenly, her voice firm. "Mom's lawyer, she has one now too, about custody stuff because of all this, said I could give a statement about how you really are, about the things he said." "Chloe, no," I said, instinctually protective. "I don't want you in the middle of this." "I'm already in the middle," she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "He put me here. He used me to spread lies about you. Let me do this. Let me tell the truth. For me." I saw her mother Lisa in her then, the same quiet steel. I hugged her, my strong, brave girl. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay." The hearing was smaller than I'd imagined, all pale wood and stale air. David sat with his lawyer across the aisle. He didn't look at me. He looked straight ahead, jaw set, the picture of aggrieved responsibility. His wife, a woman named Tanya, whom I'd never really liked, sat behind him, her expression carefully neutral. The judge was a woman in her 60s, Judge Wilkins, with a no-nonsense demeanor. David's lawyer presented his case, the affidavits about the oven, the mail, my hostility, and paranoid revocation of help. He painted David as a proactive, caring son facing a mother in denial. Then it was our turn. Eleanor presented our evidence like a master craftswoman. She submitted the results of my cognitive assessment. Above average for age cohort, no signs of dementia or impaired judgment. She entered the police report and the forensic accounting tracing my money to his account and the cemetery plot. She called witnesses. Sophia testified about the bakery's operations, about my sharp memory for complex recipes and inventory. Joe the plumber talked about my sound financial mind. My doctor testified to my physical and mental health. Then Eleanor called Chloe. My breath caught. David's head snapped around, his eyes wide with shock and betrayal. Chloe walked to the stand, sworn in, her voice clear though her hands shook. She spoke about our relationship, about my consistency, about helping me with my online bakery orders. Then Eleanor asked about her conversations with her father. "He told me Grandma was getting senile and might have to sell the bakery. He said she was a danger to herself. He told me not to bother her with my problems because she couldn't handle it. It made me sad and scared to visit her." "And based on your visits, did your grandmother seem senile or like a danger to herself?" Eleanor asked gently. "No," Chloe said, finally looking at me. A tear traced down her cheek. "She seemed like my grandma. She seemed lonely sometimes, but strong. Always strong." David's lawyer objected, but the truth of it hung in the room, palpable and damning. When it was my turn, I simply answered questions. Yes, I understood the proceedings. Yes, I managed my own finances. Yes, I had revoked my son's access because I discovered he was taking money and planning my institutionalization without my knowledge. I was calm. I was factual. I was the antithesis of the confused, fragile woman his petition described. Judge Wilkins didn't need long to deliberate. She denied the petition for temporary guardianship in its entirety. Her words were sharp. "Mr. Delaney, what I see here is not a concerned son, but a calculated campaign to gain control of an able-bodied and sharp-minded woman's assets. The evidence of financial exploitation is compelling and deeply troubling. The petition is not only denied, but I am referring this matter to the Adult Protective Services Unit for follow-up, given the criminal investigation already underway.
Mrs. Delaney, the court wishes you well. You are clearly more than capable of managing your own life." It was over. The legal threat was vaporized. The gavel fell with a finality that echoed in my bones. David left the courtroom without a word, without a glance. The victory was absolute, and it tasted like dust and ashes. The aftermath was a quiet tsunami. The criminal case proceeded. Faced with the evidence, David took a plea deal to avoid trial. He was convicted of misdemeanor financial exploitation of an elderly person, required to pay full restitution of the $31,240, the stolen money plus the cost of the plot, sentenced to community service, and placed on probation. The conviction was a matter of public record. It cost him his job in financial services. He never contacted me again. The silence that followed wasn't the hum of peace I'd imagined. It was a vast, empty canyon. I mourned the son I thought I had, the little boy who'd built forts with my tablecloths. I had loved that boy with a ferocity that had blinded me for years. Letting go of the man he became was like amputating a part of my own history. But life, stubbornly, insists on moving forward. I focused on the living. I used the returned money to set up a college trust for Chloe. I renovated the bakery's kitchen, finally buying the double-decker oven I'd always wanted. I started a small weekend baking class for teen girls, something to pass on the craft. One afternoon, about a year after the hearing, I was in the garden. The tomatoes from the plants I'd been tending the day David confronted me were ripe, bursting and red. I was harvesting them when Lisa, Chloe's mom, came by. We had formed an unlikely warm alliance through the fire. "He's moving," she said, accepting a glass of iced tea, "to another state. Fresh start," he says. I nodded, feeling nothing but a faint, distant pity. "I hope he finds it." "Chloe wants to spend the summer with you, if that's okay. She wants to learn the business, the real business, not the version her father talked about." Tears pricked my eyes then, not of sadness, but of a profound, healing gratitude. Nothing would make me happier. That summer, with Chloe's hands learning the feel of dough beside mine, the bakery filled with a new kind of energy. It was the sound of the future, chosen and full of promise. One evening, as we cleaned up, Chloe pointed to the framed cognitive assessment report I'd hung in my office, next to my first bakery license. "Why that?" she asked. "It's my diploma in proving I was still here." On my 73rd birthday, I hosted a party at the bakery after hours. It wasn't a big party, just Sophia, Joe, a few close friends, Lisa and Chloe. No fanfare, just good food and laughter. As everyone sang, I looked around at the faces, these people who had borne witness, who had stood by me, who saw me. I blew out the candles on a simple vanilla cake. I didn't make a wish. I had everything I needed right there. Later, I sat on my porch swing, the same one where Chloe had offered her truth. The cicadas were humming, and the scent of honeyclustle was thick in the air. I held a single, sun-warmed tomato from that first defiant harvest. I ran my thumb over its smooth, taut skin, a small, perfect globe of resilience. It had grown from a seed, survived the shadow of a threat, and now it was here, full of life and the promise of sustenance. I am like that tomato. I am still here. I am rooted. I endured the shadow, and now I bask in my own sun. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to rebuild your life from the wreckage of a betrayed trust, please leave a comment below. Share your own story, or just let me know you're out there. You're not shouting into a void. And if you want to hear more stories of women finding their strength in the unlikeliest of places, subscribe to this channel. Stay with me for the next one. We have so much more to say.